Okay, so now everybody can stop talking about me, stop throwing tomatoes at me, and I'm going to do the main monitor here so that this is what's being recorded, and I'm going to pin this down. So I'm sharing the monitor, I'm recording, I have the microphone, so if you're playing this back off of YouTube, you're probably hearing me talk now. Okay, so if you go into Revit and you open it up, you start out with this startup screen, which is recent files, and since this is the first time it's been opened, basically every day you come in here, Revit's going to have amnesia about files that have been opened, which is probably a good way they set it up, so that way if somebody else comes in and uses your computer, they're not opening your file as the last thing that was open on that particular computer. Now, if you come into this dialog and you hit New under Projects, that is going to create a new project, but it's not going to let you select what template is being used to create that project. So for now, for the sake of discussion, let's go ahead and hit the New Projects button. But in general, we're not going to want to do it that way. For right now, let's go ahead and do that. And that's going to use the default template, which is not the one set up for this class. And you're going to typically see in Revit a plan view with 4 of these little pointers. It looks like a box with a triangular pointer. Those are elevation markers. And that's going to be my starting point to kind of talk about the interface here. So here's the handout. I'm going to go over kind of one by one the different areas of the interface on the screen as to what they mean. So the first thing is you've got this big area that's going to be your drawing window. That's kind of obvious, and that can be divided among more than one view. So you might have 2 of them tiled or 4 of them tiled side by side here where you can look at several things happening at once. Conceptually, the biggest difference between Revit being a BIM program versus something like AutoCAD is that Revit is a model, a 3D model. Now you can do 3D modeling in AutoCAD, some of you may have done it, but you don't normally put together a set of drawings off of that 3D model. So in Revit, everything is coordinated. You've got one set of objects. And so if you've drawn a door, or we want to say built a door, that door shows up in plan, it shows up in elevation, it shows up in a door schedule, which is a view, but it's not a photographic type view. If you delete the door, it disappears from all those views at once. It's one object, and the database understands it to be an object. Whereas in plain Jane AutoCAD, you draw a line or you put in a block that represents a door, you have to be looking in a drawing that's a plan view of your building to see that door. You open up an interior elevation, it's probably a separate drawing file in AutoCAD. There's no connection or relationship or understanding between the two. Revit is one big database of information, and so the objects, building information modeling, it's three-dimensional model of a building, but it's got information in it. So even if I'm not looking at a pictorial view of a door, I can look at it on the door schedule and tell me the width, the height, the material it's manufactured from, sometimes the manufacturer. And there's a potential for a lot more information than what we're really using Revit for so far. Problem is that a lot of the information is still happening around the periphery, and the other problem is we're still kind of handing off between different firms and different disciplines, and then on to the contractor and then on to the owner. And some of you may be aware, like the AIA has been touting the idea of integrated project delivery, and they talk about the fact that a program like Revit facilitates the ability for a project team to kind of cooperate in a more collaborative mode. And in terms of the legal aspects of it, you basically form an LLC, a limited liability company, for the purpose of executing your building. And so the architect, the engineer, the landscape architect, the lighting consultant, the contractor, general contractor, the mechanical prime subcontractor, the structural engineer, the steel fabricator, all those parties are part and parcel to this company that's formed. And so instead of saying, okay, the architect draws this, he hands it off, the engineer adds this, he hands it off to the contractor, and it's up to him now to build it. If he finds something wrong, he's got to come back. The whole team is geared towards succeeding, and so you don't get paid and you point fingers at somebody who didn't do as good of a job. Everybody gets paid out of the pool of the success money on the project. And so because Revit has one big database, ultimately that's going to start happening, but there's still a lot of kind of legal walls and just cultural walls between different companies, and a lot of people still want to operate as, oh, that's your problem, you're the one who screwed up, as opposed to saying, well, we all should be able to tap into this one model, and if somebody changes something, everybody should be able to see the correct information on what has been changed by the person who should have changed it. So in a big picture sense, Revit is one big database, and usually your project is all in one file. And so if we go ahead and look at that files handout that I have here, the file type, whereas AutoCAD it's a DWG file, and we usually have a lot of them. In Revit, your whole project is in an RVT file. So make a mental note or even a written note, or you can use this handout. An RVT file is a Revit project. And there's really only mainly one or a few RVT files that comprise your project, but your library of things you're loading into that project are another type of file called a Revit family. Let me scroll down a little further. It's RFA. So an RFA is a family, and that would be an example of a component like a door, a window, a chair, a table, a cabinet, a countertop, a light fixture, individual components of the building that can be saved out to their own little RFA files. And beyond those two file types, you will occasionally come across a text file that will load a whole set of types for a particular family. Like how many people are used to working in the steel manual where you open it up and you got wide flanges and there's like 3 pages of W14 by 22 or whatever. When you load a column, a steel column into Revit, there's one family that forms that wide flange column, but there's all those types out of the book, so there'll be a text file that Revit uses to give you a choice of all the wide flange shapes, and you load whichever ones you want. That file is sometimes used, but mainly these two files, and then when we make a new project, we're using an RTE project template to create the project. Now, one mistake I want to make sure nobody makes this time, because it's been made in my class many times in the past, is instead of saying File, New Project, find the template you're making the project from and saying, bam, here's my new project, people go and they open the template. And when you open an RTE file and then you go to save it as H. Smith, ARC 124 House A, and so on, it becomes an RTE instead of an RVT. And so sometimes people will submit their assignment A and it will be a template instead of a project. So in order for that to happen, you have to say, I want to create a new project. So you purple R, new project, not open project or open template. And just in Microsoft Word, when you say, I want a new letter, and you go out and find a template, a .dotx, it makes a .docx file out of it in Microsoft Word. The same thing happens, pretty much the same in Revit. You're saving it as a project. So we're going to start that in a couple minutes. Then the other thing to know about files is, who can tell me in AutoCAD, every time you save your DWG file, what happens as a backup? It makes one file called a BAK file. So if this was plan1.dwg, then you have a plan1.bak. And that BAK was the previous save, and the DWG is your latest save. Well, in Revit, it's a little bit different than that. The files that it backs up with, every time you say, I want to save this file, come back half an hour later, save it again, Revit saves them all as RVT files, but it puts a dot and a bunch of a 4-digit number after it. So the first time you save, you have an RVT and a .0001.RVT. Second time you save, you have a .0001, 0002, and your .revit. The one that doesn't have the dot and the numbers is always your latest, greatest copy, your most current file. And if you compare dates and times, you'll see the latest date and time, and usually the biggest file, unless you've been deleting stuff, will be that one. And so you're always, you want to be careful not to open up one of those files that has the numbers before the RVT. So the danger is you go File, you go Open, you look at your folder, and those file names are cut off. And so all you see is House A and it's cut off. Make sure that you widen that so you can see that that's a backup file and don't open it by mistake. Because then if you open that, you've got an outdated copy. Then when you save, it becomes a .003, .001, and then you've got a big mess on your hands, and you've got to close Revit and rename your files and try to figure out which one's the latest. So be careful about those two things. Make sure you're creating a project from the template, and make sure that when you go back and open what you worked on earlier, you're not opening a backup, you're opening the one and only latest copy. These backups are there in case you mess up. You deleted stuff and you went on to work and you go, oh no, I shouldn't have deleted that half an hour ago, but I saved twice since then. You'd be able to go back and say, oh, see how this one was bigger than that one. That was the one before I deleted. Then what you do is rename it, call this House A-, screwed up, and this one has a .rdt without the numbers. So that's how those work, and I just wanted to explain that up front so everybody hopefully will start on the right page with that.
Is there a limit to the number of backup files that it will create?
Good question.
Control it?
Absolutely, yeah. What will happen is by default it assumes you want 3, but you can change it. And if you want to change it, what you do is you go in and you go File, Save As, you hit Options, you say, I want to keep 12 at a time. So then it's going to purge out, you might have 19 through 20, 31, however many 12 would be, and then the numbers below that have been purged away. So normally you'll just see the 3, and then the numbers will stop at that number because you've saved 5 times and it got rid of the 1 and the 2.
Does it do an autosave at all? Or?
That's another good question. What it does is it automatically prompts every so many minutes, and you can say, forget it, or you can say, yes, I'll save. The reason that you have a tendency to say forget it is you might be in the middle of doing something, and it interrupts you and it says, you ought to save. And it's really good to say, yes, I'll save, and wait that 10 seconds and then go back to what you're doing. And you can set the time interval. So if you're comfortable losing 30 minutes worth of work, don't set that automatic save to anything higher than 30 minutes. And that's how much you can potentially mess up if you save and then you screw it up, you can go back to the backup copy. So you need to be going back to one of these. So it's nice that there's more than one copy, and it's just not automatic. So you just have to remember the one time that you say, oh no, I'm not going to save this time even though you asked me to, I'll do it later, and then you go on for another 20 minutes and then you screw it up and you haven't saved. Any other questions about the files? Okay. Let's go back to the user interface again. So far I've only talked about the drawing window here. All your file operations in Revit are going to come out of the what's called the application menu. That application menu is that square with the purple R on it in the upper left. So I may say purple R such and such, or application button such and such. Or sometimes I say, oh, let's do file open, but the file dialog is really purple R and then open project or open family or something like that, or new project, new family. So, and again, if you close whatever windows you have open, it's going to revert back to this recent files screen. But again, you always have that application menu. You just lose a lot of the other controls when you don't have an actual project file or a family file open. Now the next thing on here is the ribbons and tabs. And if you've used the latest versions of Microsoft Office, you're probably familiar with ribbons and tabs. And you go to each one and it has a series of panels, and in each panel is a series of buttons that are the tools, and then sometimes there's a down arrow from those buttons. Right now I can't use any of them because I don't have a file open. So let's go ahead and start, and we're going to start what will be assignment A. And so we don't want to hit new project here because this should really say new project in parentheses, but I'm only going to use the default template. You're not going to get to pick which project template you're using. So to pick the template, we need to go to the purple R, application menu, and say new project. Then it's going to give you this dialog that says, okay, here's the template that it's defaulting to, but you can browse for a different template. So everybody at this point, new project? Okay. Go to purple R, new project, and then once you get this, you there?
Click on new.
Go up to the purple R and say new project. And when you hit new, you want to make sure that you're hitting the right arrow to the right of new, and then project here. And so now we're going to select the template. If you click into this box and scroll with your right arrow, you'll see, okay, there's the path and there's the template file. It's called default.rte. Yes?
I saw that was on the T drive though, but mine came up on the C.
And that's, again, probably because they didn't get the doggone things mapped. So what we're going to do is we're going to browse. Because if you are really using default, there's a copy on your C drive that matches. But instead, we want to use the one I put out there. So hit browse here. And that's probably indeed looking on your C drive. You want to go to my computer and go to T here. I'll make sure everybody keeps up with me on this. So I'll pause.
T.
And remember, I got there by browsing out of this little window.
Right.
browse,
Architecture.
then architecture. After you go to architecture, now don't get trapped by one of the classes. We're going to the Revit content folder, which is where I keep the library, the network copy of the library. And then I need to start purging out those old versions, but RAC 2012 is the latest. Don't accidentally do Revit Structure 2011 or Revit MEP 2011. The RAC 2012. Now normally there would be a shortcut right here that would take you right to that, and that's the part that I've been fighting with them on, and I need to bug them every week until they get it right. And then this out of the box, Autodesk out of the box, that's what you get that's installed by default from Revit. That's the stuff which, to be real honest, their content that they give you, like their doors and their windows and their furniture, it's kind of crappy, to be honest. It's not very well built. I build much better doors than what they give you, and most people who get good at it can build better stuff, but there are certain rules they follow that make sense. So I've got this STLCC Meramec Revit library that I put together. So you go to that subfolder. Now we're looking for a project template. So we go to Templates, and then US Imperial. Now remember how I said you don't want to truncate the end of the file name as you're creating something because you won't know if you have the right one? The trick that not everybody knows about Windows, most everybody knows that if you hover over this little seam, you get that arrow and you can stretch the file name wider. But what a lot of people don't know is if you hover until you get that little arrow, double click it, and it makes it exactly as wide as it needs to be to fit everything in that column. So I would get in the habit of when this looks cut off, just double click here so you can see the entire file. And today, I opened at 7 p.m. I saved a new copy of that template, so I'm going to delete that so nobody accidentally uses that. And we want to select the one that says ARC124 House Session 1. This is tonight's Session 1. We're going to use that template, and from here on out of the gate, we're using it, and we're going to build on this every session from there. So when you select it, by highlighting it, you can either double-click it, or you can single-click and hit Open. The term open is a little bit of a misnomer. What you're doing is you're selecting that. You're not really opening that template. You're selecting it to be used as the photocopy source for what we're making. So I'm going to double-click it. And then it plugs that value into this box. So that is the template file that we're using, the ARC124 House Session 1.RTE, which means Revit Project Template. And you'll never change this to project template because you're not creating another template. You're creating your project from my template. So unless you've gotten to the point where you're setting yourself up with your own templates or you're in an office where you're setting things up, then you might switch over to say, okay, I'm making a new template. But 99.9 times out of 100, you're going to be making a project. So leave that button punched. And when you say okay, it kind of duplicates the template, it opens it up, and there you are, and that's what you're going to see in my template plan view, but it's not my template anymore. It's your project 1, or mine says project 2. So the very next thing we want to do, and this is in the assignment A handout thing here, you go new project, you browse to the session 1 template, and you see those green lines. Then the very next thing you want to do is save as your new project file. And so let's go in and hit save. And because you used a template and this is a new project, if you just hit the save button up here, or you can go in here and do save or save as, a save is going to force it to ask you where to put it and what to call it because it won't overwrite the template if you say new project from template. That's different than opening the template, and then you're stuck in a template that you can't save to the same place. So now, to save it, you want to go to the S drive. And again, the shortcut to the S drive, if you just click on the My Documents here, it takes you to S. Then you can go to Architecture, the first H. Smith, Summer 2012. And if you go to Student Files, you'll see everybody. I created a folder that has the name that you use for your username in email and also on the Blackboard. And so when you name your file, I'd like you to put that same username in the front of it. So I'm going to go to, I'll just go ahead and make a folder that's ZZZ.
Hold on.
Okay.
I'm on the S drive here.
Okay.
Student data, image opera, Asst drive.
Mm-hmm.
Which folder? Architecture, I guess?
Architecture, and then you'll see ARC 124H Smith Summer.
Gotcha.
Then you go to student files underneath that. And then you'll see an Bldg 56, which is you. I'm going to open my ZZ HD Smith. I put mine at the end just so nobody lumps into it. Now, so I'm going to say HD Smith, which is my username. And if you're in doubt, you can go back to the Blackboard. There's a note there on the main page. And it says, username underscore, ARC124-house-A. Underscore ARC124-house-A. There's no dash between ARC and 124. It's just the word ARC124-house-A. And the reason I'm such a stickler is then if I have a bunch of files that I've downloaded, they've all been separated by each person's username first, and then second I'll be able to look at them and say, oh, there's Andre's house A, his house B, his house C, and so on later. So you're making my life easier by being very strict about following this naming system. And if you imagine working in an office where other people are teaming up with you, you're going to save them a headache by getting in this habit. And a lot of you are probably used to doing that for AutoCAD. Some people might not be. So when you hit save, it makes an RVT file. And then you can go out here with your Windows Explorer and go to your student folder, and you should see that file right there. So I'm going to just pick on somebody here. I'm going to pick on Charles. There you go. See Robin 3, ARC 124-house-A. Good job. Okay. And that shows how everybody can see everybody else's files. Now, hopefully everybody can't delete anybody else's file. I think they've kind of set it up so that that can't happen, but I did have somebody save and they were going to the file and alphabetically the one right after their name by mistake, and somebody said, "What's wrong with my files?" And they realized they'd put them somewhere else. So just be conscious of that. And I like to keep an Explorer window open down here so that I can have my folder ready to look at from time to time. And if I have any questions, I can see my backups, I can see what time I saved it, and how big the file is. See, the file right out of the gate is almost 6 megabytes, which is bigger than most AutoCAD drawing files, because there's a lot of information in here. Any questions so far? Everybody has those two green, these things are called reference planes here. And the next part of the interface I want to talk about, I mentioned these ribbons and tabs. I'm going to be getting into the specifics, but basically the structure of this, you click on a tab and it shows you the whole ribbon, and each one of these little headings at the bottom are called panels. And so if I say go to the Home tab, the Build panel, and the Wall button, you go Home, you look for Build, and here's the Wall button. Now the next thing I want to explain about how these buttons work is some of them it's just a plain button, like Door. You just hover over it, it kind of pre-highlights and you click it and you're ready to put in a door. Now you can't put in a door without any walls, so how do you get out of the command? You either click on this Modify, which goes back into kind of neutral, you're ready to select things but you're not doing anything mode. But the way I like to get out of a command, let's go back into Door again by mistake on purpose. And then you hit Escape twice, and that gets you out of the command. So you're going to start to realize that your left hand needs to be handy on the left edge of the keyboard with Escape, because that's the one key you're going to hit the most is Escape, and you're normally going to hit it twice. Because to me, it's a lot easier to hit Escape, and then just to go over and look for that and click in the right spot. Keyboard shortcuts tend to be faster. Now, some people like them better than others, and there's usually 3 or more ways to skin the cat in Revit, just like other programs, but the keyboard shortcut I'm going to start to introduce and talk about as we go. But Escape is not really a shortcut, it's just kind of a built-in key that you're just going to be using all the time. Okay, now the next part of the interface is right here. This is called your project browser, and it even has its name written at the end of the heading there. The project browser is kind of like Windows Explorer inside of your project. It says, okay, here's the roadmap to everything inside my project file. It starts out with the views. I'm going to explain what those are more technically. And then it goes down through the different kinds of views. And then the next thing below views is legends, which we don't have any yet. Then it shows schedules, like a door schedule, a window schedule, room finish schedule. And then your sheets, which I've already created 2 sheets in here that you'll find. And then families. And the families are all of the content, the individual components, the wall types, the roof and ceiling and floor types, all the different typologies, so to speak, that you're going to use to build stuff. And then, so those are all listed in categories. I'm going to go through this terminology more strictly as we get through it, but suffice it to say for now that the browser has all these different areas where you can see what's in your project. Get down to the bottom and their groups, explain those later, and then Revit links. And a link is when you take kind of like an XREF in AutoCAD. Let's say your mechanical engineer is using Revit MEP and they have a Revit file that has all the ductwork, the supply and return diffusers, the HVAC equipment, and they're going in light fixtures and plumbing fixtures and the piping. You will probably, as the architect, link their file into your file. And you can't change what's in their linked file, but you can see it and you can build around it and you can reference things in it and you can compare and find conflicts between a pipe and a wall or a pipe and a column. And there's a way that you can go in and do these interference checks in Revit. But we won't get into that in this class, but in one of my advanced sessions. And what I do is I post these on my website. So if anybody either gets far enough along in this class and they're ready to come to one of the advanced topics that I might schedule, or when you finish, let me know and I'll put you on my email list that I'll show you what my website looks like later, and I have links to enroll and I have a fee to come into some of these sessions that I just do on my own. And usually I have them run so that if you have a laptop and you do the student version, you can come in and participate that way. I don't have my own lab with my own computers, unfortunately, yet, but maybe one of these days. So anyway, we won't do links in this class. So project browser, ribbons with tabs, panels, and buttons. Application menu. This is your properties palette, which hasn't been around more than 2 versions. In the older versions of Revit, you would select something, and to see its properties, you had to right-click and go Properties. Well, now Properties is always visible over here, this panel, kind of like they did with AutoCAD. There's a Properties window that can be up all the time. Well, that's normally docked there. You can accidentally close it. Go ahead and do that by accident, and I'll show you how to turn it back on. I've got my project browser, but I lost Properties. So you can right-click and say Properties, and that will turn it back on. But if you close the project browser, the only way to turn it back on is kind of buried. It's not a button you can see all the time. You have to go to the View tab, go all the way to right to User Interface, and you look for the checkbox that says Project Browser, and that turns it back on. So that's a trick you have to know because it's almost too easy to accidentally close that. And this is probably a good stopping point. We'll go ahead and take a 15-minute break. Start back at 8:45. And if anybody has any questions, I'm going to hang on here for a few minutes, and then we'll come back at 8:45. And I'm going to stop the recording here.
No, I have one.
I'm sorry, how did you forward properties back up again?
If you just right-click in the middle of the drawing window,
Oh,
and at the bottom is properties.
Okay.
That'll also show up in that user interface list along with the browser, but it's quicker for properties, just right-click.
So on Fridays, we check the blackboard for
Yeah.
quizzes. Okay.
Yeah, and I'll show you where it'll be.
Kind of lost in all the
Yeah, there's an
administrative
assignments
stuff
and then
first.
quizzes. So, you can always email with questions, and if you get in a crunch and there's a deadline, I've got my cell phone number on there too. So.
That's cool.
Mhm.
I'm a little lost.
Is there a wall?
I can't get to that sound.